Welcome to Absolutely Fabulous. My name is Gillian Fennell, also known as Station Mum 101. I love everything about agriculture, especially the people and especially communicating about what makes Australian ag so special.
And I'm Katja Williams, a beef, cattle and cropping farmer, and I love all things ag, and I'm also known as the ultimate farm wife. Together, we are absolutely fabulous, and we are talking all things agriculture beyond the headlines.
And we can't wait to give our opinion to you, and we hope you enjoy it.
So let's get into today's episode. Welcome everybody to another episode of Absolutely Fabulous. It's episode 20 and we are talking all about the ABC's news article, Women from Farming and Mining Families Experiencing Domestic Violence Often Do Not Speak Up, and also the government's plans to strip water from farmers, which will force many to pull the plug on food and fibre production. But before we jump into those topics, let's start with some chit-chat. Gillian, what's happened the last few days?
I'm home. I finally made it home. So finally finished all my stuff that I had to do down south. And guess what? Next week I'm off to Alice Springs for a week with Eleanor for school. So a very, very brief reprieve, but it is good to be back in my own comfort zone with a decent internet connection that I could not achieve the entire time that I was in civilization. So good to be home. What are you up to, Katja?
We are flat out at the moment, so we are still in haymaking season. So we've still got at least another 2 cuts if the weather's with us for making hay. We are currently ploughing and grading all our seed for sowing our crops on the next lot of really good rain. So we should have all our crops in by end of March, which is about usually when we get them in, which is great. And then our first cattle show kicks off this Saturday. So busy. And on top of that, my fridge decided this morning it was no longer going to work. So I've pulled absolutely all of everything out of my fridge and freezer, and I've got the camp fridges running overboard. So, or overtime on that. So once I get off this call and I'll be sorting out what needs to be chucked and what needs to be kept, and then I might have to go do some fridge shopping this afternoon. So
a big feast at your place today, obviously, eating everything that's out of the fridge.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's been prioritised, and we'll work out what we can eat from there.
So a heavy subject to start with today.
Yes.
This comes, and a lot of people say, why are you talking about this? But this is something that's come up in the research that I've been doing for the Succession podcast about exposure to domestic violence and coercive control, which a lot of people might not perceive as abuse, but it actually is. Like when you say, if you don't do X, you won't have money for groceries, all those sorts of things. And I'll just state up front, we're probably going to talk about in the context of partners against female partners, because that's the most prevalent one, but abuse does happen across all different relationships. So there's not saying that it's not of reverse, that sometimes women abuse their husbands or male partners, parents abuse children, all those sorts of things. But for this conversation, we're mainly focusing on the impact that it has on the female in the partnership, because traditionally that's where the power dynamic lies, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So it's a bit of a concern, because that article from the ABC highlights the fact that even though it's fairly prevalent, it often goes unreported, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One, because they don't feel like they'll be believed, often because the abuser has a position of power influence in the community. They don't want to report it because they know everyone in the community, so they know the police, they know the clinic workers, they know anyone who might be in a position to give them help, and it leads to some pretty nasty scenarios. And so you live in a more sort of, I guess, settled area, Katja, with more people. Is there a very high incidence of DV in your community, do you think?
There definitely is. Most of the reporting in our area, or what the media focus on in this area, is more to do with the Indigenous population rather than amongst its farming mining population. So it would be interesting to see the statistics on that across the nation and across this area as well. from doing a lot of interviews with the ultimate farm wife, particularly when the camera stops recording and we're just having a little chat either beforehand or afterwards, there's definitely mentions of a power struggle. There's definitely mentions of, oh, I need to be kept in check because of X, Y, and Z. Like even in the article, it explained like that power they have over the inheritance or over your future outcome. You're expected to be on the farm, you're expected to work in it and on it and be the primary carer and all the other hats that you wear. But a lot of it is held over your head. Like, will you and your husband be written out of the will? Or will a lot of the ladies talk about luxuries and what's considered a luxury for a farming family or a mining family in these situations is very different. So a luxury would be, can I buy the groceries this week, which is really horrible for a first world country. Groceries shouldn't be considered a luxury item. Buying something for yourself like a razor or a nice bar of soap shouldn't be considered a luxury, but it is in a lot of these families because that's how tightly the strings are held on their budget and what they can and can't spend.
I wonder how many of our listeners have heard the line from their in-laws to their husband or male partner, you better get your wife in line or else, or if she doesn't watch her mouth, or if she doesn't do what she's like. And it's all these sorts of insidious types of things. And another thing that's sort of come up through my research for the Succession podcast is when people are in stock camps and stuff on big cattle stations, and there's not the inheritance type issue, but they partner up, right? So, you're a Jillaroo and you partner up with one of the ringers or whatever, and he may have been there for a while. He's got an established reputation in the camp. And all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but abusers are generally pretty good at hiding their behavior from everyone else. He actually is an abusive asshole.
Yeah.
And so you're trapped in an isolated area with people who think he is just God's gift because he might be really capable. He might be really good at his job. And so you can't tell your boss because you know you'll lose your job. You'd get no support. And so you are literally quite and physically trapped, and you're trapped for a lot of different reasons. And so it's a really unfortunate scenario for people to be in. And I have spoken to some women who have disclosed to their head stockman or those sorts of things, or the manager's wife, that this is happening. And they're not believed because, oh, well, he's a good bloke. Oh, no, I can't imagine him doing something like that. And some of the things that they disclose are actually very horrific and, would be jailable offences because it's terrible. And I think one thing that our industry, agriculture, needs to take more seriously is if someone tells you something like that, 9 times out of 10, they're not making it up, because the impact of them disclosing that is just as much on them as the abuse continuing, because they will go to their boss and complain, oh, well, you're the troublemaker, so you'll be sacked. Then their partner goes, oh, well, I'm losing control of her, so I might escalate my behaviour. And once kids get into the mix, it becomes a whole nother level of, oh, he's a good dad, or you shouldn't restrict your access to the kids because he's actually a nice guy. And so we need to start taking women more seriously when they say these things are happening. And I don't think it should matter how good of a ringer he is, whether he's head stockman or manager or whatever. If he's committing those sorts of behaviours against someone he's in a relationship with, how is he going to treat the rest of the staff? That is a massive risk. And it really hurts me every time that someone discloses this sort of stuff to me, and I do my best to sort of escalate it within the chain that I know that I can try and help them with, but they're never taken seriously. Not by their co-workers, not by their employers, not by the broader community, because he has this sort of shiny golden boy image that he's a good ringer, he's a top bloke, oh, he's my good mate, he would never do that. And, if someone does that to someone else, they're not a good bloke. That's the end of it. And I think why a lot of people don't want to believe it is because they feel like they've been fooled. It's like, well, I thought he was a good bloke, so what does that say about me? But we need to understand that abusers are really, really adept at hiding their true selves, and they're really, really good at manipulating people. And So don't feel ashamed. If someone has fooled you by you into thinking they're a good bloke, it's got nothing to do with you. Like, they are just really good at that. So that's my dream, is that if you're listening to this and you employ people and someone comes to you and says, look, my partner's doing this to me, you, especially if you're in a remote area and they have no other supports available, you have to believe them and you have to support them. Anything else makes you just as bad as them, in my opinion.
You sort of become an enabler, especially once it has been reported. And the long-term focus on your business, if that gets out that you haven't been, even if it's just one worker, if you didn't listen to one worker or you didn't listen to, a string of them about this, how's that going to impact your business in the long term? If you're worried about your business over someone else's health, realistically, you should be worried about someone's health and safety first. But in a lot of cases, people are more than happy to turn a blind eye, particularly if it's a one-off, or you're the first person to be brave enough to talk about it. And you have to also remember, as you said, like, they're really good at hiding it. And if they think that you might speak up, if they think that, I think they're going to tattle on me, at any indication that you might be getting brave enough to step out of the relationship or step away from them or speak up, they're going to start, talking to their flying monkeys, and they're going to start embedding horrible, detrimental things about you, so that when you do speak up, they're going to, so-and-so told me you're a liar, or so-and-so's told me that you only have anything to gain from talking down that person.
You were just using him. Because whatever. And you see this a lot, especially like once a person decides to step away from a relationship, then that's when the rumor mill goes into overdrive. She's a slut. She's a psycho. Oh, you should have seen what she did and said to me. All of these sorts of things. And it's really easy for people to believe that, because that means that they are still in the right, because they are his friend and they think he's a good bloke. So it's easy to make the other person the villain. She wouldn't, she never let me have fun with my mates or anything like that. And she did this and she did that. And it's like all this narcissism and gaslighting and all of this sort of stuff. And abusers are really, really adept at using it. And we don't want to acknowledge that we might have been fooled by it. So we just nod and go, oh, yeah, she must be the problem. She's obviously a psycho bitch. Like, let's cut her out of it. But, there's a saying that sort of applies to this. So if you go out one day and you meet someone and they're an asshole, then they're an asshole. But if you go out to the shops and every single person you meet is an asshole, I think the problem might be you. So if all different girlfriends or partners or whatever say if there's something wrong with him, he's not a good guy, then I think the truth is there in that sort of scenario.
What I did notice in the last couple of weeks, particularly from Christmas to now, on the women in agricultural pages across Facebook, there is quite a lot of them, and a lot of groups as well. I have noticed if someone's applying for a station at the moment, like a different station job, some of them have started putting up there and asking, I've applied for a job on this station. Has anyone previously worked there? Let's have a chat. And I really think that is an incredible first step. Yes, let's talk about that, and let's talk about that with people who have previously worked there, because you will have someone, if something has happened to them, then they're more likely to jump into your DMs and say if so-and-so is still the stockman there, or if this person's still working in the kitchen, I would be very careful of them. Like, they don't always say don't go, but they would say be mindful of them.
Forewarned is forearmed, and that's because it's really easy, especially if it's your first time moving into that world, and a big ringer from the top end takes a shine to you, and you're just got stars in your eyes, and you're in love, and then next thing you know, holy shit, he's forcing himself on you and restricting your access to money to buy necessities and those sorts of things, like, because you're a perfect target. You're naive, you're isolated, you're far away from your family, you can't escape. So yeah, just be really cautious about that. If someone gives you a warning, take that warning in good faith, and at least, be aware, be on your lookout. And employers, if you're wondering all of a sudden why you're not getting job applications, maybe ask some people who have declined your offer of employment, ask them why they don't want to come and work at your place, because it might uncover something that you're blissfully unaware of. But as you know, Karcher, with your HR hat on, you can't afford to operate like that. You know, just because you're not aware doesn't mean you're not liable for the damage that's causing. You're 100% responsible for what's happening in your workplace, whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's a heavy one for first thing on a Monday morning. Good thing it comes out Friday afternoon so people can relax and have a little sit down. But and this is so easy to say, oh, supports are out there, this and that and everything else, because sometimes they're not, and sometimes you feel like you can't. But the old bush telegraph works really, really well. If you're stuck in a situation, contact Karcher or I, and we will activate the bush telegraph discreetly, and we will help you leave a situation. If you're in a remote area, we will make sure that you can at least get home to your parents, to somewhere safe. Don't suffer. Don't put up with it. And don't listen to all the other shit that everyone else is on about. Even in your own community, no one knows what happens in a relationship. No one can judge people. People will judge because people are people, but you're the only one who knows what's really happening. So trust in yourself. And there are people out there who will believe you and support you. So don't put yourself in danger. Yeah. Easier said than done, I know. But people do exist who can give you a hand.
And don't be persuaded into believing what people say. I mean, something I've heard quite often is, oh, he must really love you because he's spent the time to be with you and the time to do that to you. That's not love. And
that's control.
That's control. And that is just horrible that people are supporting and backing them up. You know what happened. You know what's right. Don't let them change or blur those lines. Get out. Yeah. And that is, again, easier said than done.
Stalking is not love, and this includes cyber stalking. And what I've often encountered is that abusers, like, you'll cut off all contact with your abuser, but they will then persuade one of your friends that, I just really love her and I'm so sorry, and can you just give me her new phone number, or just, you know, can you pass on a message from me? And so you never get a reprieve. And if someone does that, like passes on them, if you've told that person, look, this is how he treated me, and then they choose to still pass on messages from him, cut them out too, because they are enabling him in abusing you. And they might learn the lesson, the error of their ways in the future, but you don't have to deal with their shit right now. Look after yourself. It's not your responsibility to make your abuser feel better about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, that was out of the research study that was done in South Australia by Associate Professor of the University of South Australia, Sarah Wendt. So she would have some additional research studies outside that ABC coverage if you're interested in following this story along even more. So Gillian, that takes us to the mid of our episode. And this part of the episode is sponsored by Farm Table. So thank you, Farm Table. Farm Table now hosts our podcast page, our landing page. So I will add that in the show notes below for you all to check out. But welcome to Farm Table. Farm Table is a proud independent Australian agricultural knowledge platform, bringing together the most relevant and curated agricultural resources from around the globe. More than that, Farm Table supports industry collaboration, peer-to-peer networking, and functions to build the capacity of individuals and organisations across the entire Australian ag supply chain. With over 3,000 resources, the latest agricultural events, funding opportunities, grants, micro courses and workshops, all in one location, Farm Table makes it easier to find the information you need. So, Gillian, do we have an Ag Fab of the Week?
You know what, we don't, because, and this is all down to me, I've been incredibly slack because I've had no internet for 2 weeks practically, like just a little bit on my phone here and there. So I haven't been on the socials. We haven't had cool YouTube clips to post because the past 2 times we've recorded, my camera hasn't been working because of internet. Thank you, Telstra. And so we don't have an Ag Fab of the Week, but we are always on the lookout for Ag Fabs of the Week. So by all means, get on the socials, put yourself out there, make a comment, leave a comment on your favourite podcasting platform because we love them, and then I will take it and turn it into a social tile and show the whole world what you think of us. So only good vibes, please. So yeah, we don't have an ag fab of the week, but merch is coming. I've been talking to a supplier. I've got a few designs. I might post a few on the socials to get your feedback to see what you think. Yeah, so it's coming. It's coming.
Now, I did see a Land article released this morning on the online Land with a beautiful statement from Telstra, following up from the episode we had last week, about the telecommunications. Now, the statement that Telstra has released is that the poor service is due to incorrect settings in your phone. So I haven't seen any setting updates or anything we should be changing in our phone to receive the updated service. And if that's something that people are going to have to do manually, then that's really poor communication on their behalf on how to actually finish rolling that out. But I don't know if that's just another here or there statement that they have released to try and keep covering their butts.
It is. That's that corporate communications PR piece that's like, okay, so in a crisis situation, what you're supposed to do, like your PR guidebooks and ethical PR will tell you, the first thing you do is acknowledge the issue, apologize, and make steps to fix. All right. If you're an unethical practitioner of public relations, you will deflect the blame ideally onto someone who has no power or no control over it, i.e. the end user. So that's us. Telstra's telling us it's not our fault. You're just too dumb to work your phone properly, which is what that statement sort of boils down to. Make no moves to improve service or actually even acknowledge that there's a problem exists. So it's just deny, deflect, and sort of discombobulate the people. And what will happen is that we'll maintain their share price, because their shareholders go, well, there's not a problem at this company that I own a large stake in. It's obviously those dumb farmers. They're too stupid to use their phones properly. Everything's beautiful here. We don't need to ask management any tricky questions. We don't need to make sure that they're doing their job properly. That's exactly what that statement is. And yeah, so my degree that I've very nearly finished is finally starting to pay off, because I can read PR statements and see through the bullshit. So
if you've got other statements, AgFabs, if you're reading other statements
you'd like
or
us
other
to
articles,
dissect, we will quite happily do that.
Gillian will dissect those, send them through, and we'll give you our interpretation of that. So following on from our red meat episode that we did a little while back now, and crossing it with the labelling episode we did more recently, Gillian, as an MLA representative, the question is, Gillian, if I'm buying MLA branded meat in the supermarket, is it guaranteed to be Australian beef?
Yes, if you pick up something in the supermarket and it's got the MSA label on it, Meat Standards Australia, so that's owned by industry. So the whole red meat industry owns that branding, I guess, and that is only applied to Australian meat. It has to meet certain standards. So when it turns up to the meatworks and it's killed, it has to meet certain standards to get that label on it. So it's killed in Australia, it's Australian beef, 100% guaranteed to be Australian.
Beautiful. And that's MSA.
Yep.
Beautiful. Now, I did also see on the socials this morning while I was scrolling before we logged into today's call, and that is that the 2025 Queensland, Victoria and South Australia Rural Women's Awards state finalists have been announced. Have you seen any of those profiles and jobs pop up?
I have, because I have a favourite, obviously, from South Australia, and her name is Marie, and she is working on some really, really cool technology about preg testing cattle externally. And so she's my favourite, obviously. Or anyone who reaches, because the nomination process is really quite strict and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. So anyone who's made it to that level, congratulations, ladies, you're already smashing it. And like, I won't be disappointed if my favourite doesn't win, a little tiny bit, but you know, anyone who has been nominated deserves it. So get in there, support them, learn about their projects and what they're doing, get engaged with them, get involved, because these sorts of awards, some of them might say, oh, you know, they're just everyone patting each other on the back, but they're a really good way, even if you don't win, they're a really good way to raise the profile of your project, because all of these projects are worthwhile and give value back to rural communities. So at least take the time to read the blurbs and learn about them, follow along, keep in touch, because who knows where they might end up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, if you have a favorite, jump on the socials, share them with us and tag them in this episode. We'd love to know more about them and see your interaction with that.
If we were bookies, we could start running a book on it and take bets. That would be slightly illegal, but I'm sure someone unethical might engage in that sort of behaviour.
And I'm sure the New South Wales and Northern Territory and Tasmania, let me say that again. I'm sure the New South Wales, Tasmanian and Northern Territory finalists will be announced in the coming weeks as well, which will be very exciting to see.
Yep, it will be. It's going to be another cream of the crop of the Australian rural women. It's definitely worth following along.
Absolutely. Oh, and I have a really exciting update on the conference. Ooh. So I can now announce that my MC will be Alistair Mosey, who was actually featured in the last season of The Ultimate Farm Wife, which I did. So Alistair is a cereal cropper and merino sheep farmer from South Australia. So I think at this rate, we're going to have, at least a car, maybe 2 carloads coming across from South Australia for the conference, which is really, really exciting. And it's absolutely fantastic to be able to have him over emceeing.
And if anyone would like to sponsor that car driving over, put your signage on the side of my Prado, more than happy to do that. Just reach out and let us know. You can get us, we can make you some little YouTube and Instagram video clips and put them on the socials and all those sorts of things. So if you want to sponsor our trip across, fuel companies, Perry's, I'm looking at you. You're a regional South Australian business. Anyone who maybe has a rural retailer in South Australia / New South Wales, give us a call, because we will quite happily take your money and make you some really cool little clips to put on social media.
Absolutely. Love that. Now let's jump into topic 2. The government plans to strip water from farmers, which will force many of them to pull the plug on food and fibre production, released by the New South Wales Farmers press release. So,
yeah, the government loves making decisions that they don't have to live with the consequences of. And it doesn't matter which government, they all love to do it. I acknowledge that there needs to be a certain amount of water set aside for the environment, because you've got to keep the waterways healthy, because your ecosystem around you, if it's not healthy, then your land's not healthy. We all understand that. We live in it. We know. We don't need people who don't live in our area to tell us that. We fully acknowledge it. But we also live in an area where the majority of these communities are based around agriculture, are heavily invested in and supplying services to agriculture. So once agriculture is removed from those communities as an industry, then those communities will die. And my concern whenever we have these discussions is always the people, not just the farmers, but the people who live in the towns and need those communities to be a certain size so they can maintain their school, their doctor, their hospital, their police. Because we can't fit, technically we can fit more people into our cities, but our cities are full. So why not enhance our regional areas and let people live out there and give them the services that they need to? You can't strip industry out of an area and then expect people to just exist. And the people will say, oh, what about tourism, this and that and everything else? Tourism is great. It's a great add-on, but it does not generate as much money as agriculture. And also you can't eat a tourism experience. You can't wear a tourism experience. We need to start thinking about what's really, really important to society in general. And food, I think, has to be at the top of the pyramid. If you don't have adequate food that is produced sustainably and is healthy and good for you and is produced to a standard that is high enough so that it doesn't make people sick, then that's what we need to do more of, because we're a net exporting nation. I'm sure if you've listened to the podcast before, we all acknowledge that. We're not just feeding ourselves, we're feeding the entire world. So, do we want to let other people starve to death because people in the cities, it makes people in Canberra or people in Parliament House in New South Wales feel good to let all that water rush down to the Coorong in South Australia so the pelicans can swim around in it. Like, there needs to be some sort of balance. And I think this is what people who make these decisions don't understand, is that, again, they don't have to live with these decisions. They don't have to live with the consequences of their actions. They get to tick a box that says, yes, we're very friendly to the environment, except for the environment for the people who live there. So yeah, that's my little rant.
Yes. And you've touched on a little bit where I was going to go with that, which is import, export. If we're not producing as much here and as much higher quality, like the quality that we are, then we've said it in many episodes, your food prices are going to go up. You're going to have to pay more for Australian products, whether that's in your grocery market or whether that's in your clothing stores and your retail outlets. Agriculture is really important. It feeds us, it clothes us. Why are we taking more away from that? I can only see a decrease in the brain is not working. I can only see a decrease in quality. I can only see a decrease in actual quality of life. Like we're talking about, particularly under this most recent government, is the crisis of living. And they're going to attack the source that's providing the food and fibre for everybody, again, not only just in Australia, but also in the cities. I think when it comes down to topics like water, their restrictions, they're not looking at the bigger picture, because if they looked at the bigger picture, they wouldn't be attacking it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I often get into these sorts of debates online, and people will send me photos of the Murray, for example, that's dry, right? And say this isn't natural, this isn't normal for a river in Australia. It is 100% normal for a river in Australia to be dry. That is 100%. The nature of Australia. If it wasn't for the barrages and weirs and all that sort of things that we've put in the Murray Darling recently, like in the last 100 or so years, there wouldn't be water in it probably for half the year, because that's how those rivers work. You'd have a few big billabongs and stuff like that because that's how they work. But rivers in Australia, unless you're in like the alpine areas or whatever, but they do not flow year round in all areas.
And that's the same as a lot of the lakes. A lot of Australian lakes may only see water naturally every few years.
And, you know, we've gotten a lot better recently at measuring water. And so we can measure what people take and measure what the environment needs and all those sorts of things. But the thing about the environment is that Australia, before white people turned up, it existed and thrived throughout very, very challenging circumstances. But we turned up, white people turned up, and we were like, oh, what? We know better than these creatures that have lived here for tens of thousands of years. We know better than these ducks and fish and birds and turtles and everything like that. We will make it look like Europe.
Yeah.
We will make it so that there's a river here all the time, because that's what our European mentality said to us. And people then got used to the idea of like, well, of course a river's got to have water in it 24/7, 365, because that's where they lived back in the old country. That's what they were used to. But Australia doesn't run like that. And anyone who's ever lived, I would say not spent time, but lived and worked in the interior of Australia will understand that it's very seasonal, and it's boom and it's bust. And the creatures generally make their own arrangements, and their populations flourish and die down. And yes, there's some that we need to really protect, because again, white people have gone in and made an absolute mess of their environment. But we need to give our native wildlife a bit more credit for being able to survive and be resilient, because that's what they've always done.
Yeah. I think it's also not believing everything you see as a traditional image of certain areas. So, I mean, I've always grown up in Central West New South Wales, but the first time that my family and I are big campers, particularly when I was younger, and we would go out to the deserts and we would go on these big trips around Australia rather than going overseas. We loved exploring Australia. And the most amazing flowers and wildlife I have seen actually live in the Australian deserts. And I think that's a testament to themselves. Like, if all you think is Australian deserts is just sand, then you have to go out and look at the wildflowers and all of the different wildlife out there, because it is incredible. Yes, it can be dry. Yes, it can just be sand. But when it rains, it just comes alive, and you can't be judging the desert or any of our wetlands or our production based just off one cycle. There is a huge cycle, and whether that's, they don't always operate seasonally or annually. Some of those ecological systems and wildlife will be, a 5 or 10-year cycle. So you can't be judging and making decisions based on a 12-month period.
Yeah, and it's that sort of short-sighted election period thinking that will make a very popular policy that will get us re-elected. That leads to these, what I think will be more ecological disasters, because if you change the environment to the extent that, like, the animals then get used to having a certain amount of water, and that when that water does get cut off for whatever reason, it could be a natural disaster, could be anything, could be climate change, then you will see big, massive deaths. And we saw this. So in Queensland and in South Australia, probably in New South Wales as well, they have the GABSI program where they're capping all the flowing bores out of the Great Artesian Basin. Now, some of those have established wetlands, like because they just drilled a hole and just let water go out on the flat for 150 years. And so there were wetlands, and so there were creatures that were living there, and they, in their like generations, they had never known anything different. So when they capped those flowing bores, the animals were like, what the hell, man? Like, and they perished and they died because you took away what they were used to, because we interfered with that. So the more that we try to fix things, it seems to me, the worse we make it. So it's like, yeah, it's...
I think it sounds like what we're trying to say, Gillian,
yeah.
is leave it alone. Don't make an election promise or policy just to get you re-elected. Leave it alone and do what's right.
Yeah. Like, we have the capacity now to measure, densities of animals and all those sorts of things. I'm sure there's plenty of uni students marching around the bush counting birds and frogs and all that sort of stuff. I haven't, and this is the thing about university funding as well, unless you've got something alarming and something fantastical that's really sort of going to hit the front page of the newspapers and the front page of the news, you won't get funding to continue your research. So if you went and did some research that said, that area, it's fine, got plenty of water, frogs are cool, fish are cool, birds are cool, everyone's happy living their life, agriculture takers seems to be right on the money, communities are thriving, no more funding for you, and then you've done yourself out of a job. So there's always this need to catastrophize. And if we don't do this, and if we don't do that, and the birds are all going to die and the fish are all going to die, and once the fish die, the birds will die, and it'll just, society will, as we know it, will collapse, and everything will be the end of the world. It's just so frustrating because we live and work in these systems, and we observe them over long periods of time. And yes, people say that's anecdotal evidence. It's not the same as rigorous scientific research, and I acknowledge that. But we've also seen it being really bad, and then we see it rain and we see it come back again. And, I think, and again, it's one of those cases of work with us, not against us, and maybe we can get some actual outcomes for the environment that will be beneficial, that don't just rely on politicians making election promises, and actually enhance the world that we all live in and share.
Absolutely. I didn't have anything else to add. So thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Absolutely Fabulous. We would love to hear from you, whether you are commenting on our socials, jumping into our direct messages, or leaving us a review on the platforms where you listen to your podcasts, even over on the YouTube channel. Until next time, we'll see you all soon.
Bye.